So, what year did you get released in Canada?
Well, I was deported to England, 1987.
Why were you deported to England?
I was born here,
Whereabouts in England were you born?
Carlisle.
Okay, and how did you end up in America?
My mother was a professor there.
So, your parents, were they both from Scotland,
No, no, my father's from Lincolnshire.
Lincolnshire,
Yeah,
and your mother
she was Canadian.
Canadian, and then they were teaching and working out of California? I
Yeah,
see.
they both got PhDs at the University of California.
I see. Okay. So, when you ended up deported to the UK, did you have anybody here?
Well, I got some cousins. I got some cousins, but of course, you know, you get your family reputation is basically
The black sheep.
yeah.
So what was your support structure? What year was it again? Sorry, that you came back.
1987.
So 1987, we've got England is it's like the crash of 87, is it? The big rise of the yuppies and all that kind of stuff. Thatcher, is it? And you're coming back to the UK, black sheep, family members probably don't want to support you. So what do you do?
The Dole.
The dole.
Yeah,
And did the dole give you housing benefit, a place to live and all
yeah,
that? A flat?
yeah.
What part of the UK were you in?
South Coast.
South
Yeah.
Coast. And
So
did
I basically got the dole, but I mean, in those days you could live on the dole, and it was okay, but there's no future to it. So I thought to myself, I've got to take my education a bit further if I'm going to do anything, because I mean I have to say, I realized that I'd gone as close to the edge of the abyss as you could. Now the guys, remember I told you there were guys in my tip? Well, dead, dead, life without possibility of parole, life, but another life on top of that. So that was the option.
so you know thinking, look at what's happened to those guys. I'm going to make a go of the straight and narrow and try and rebuild my life and not go back to crime.
Exactly. I completely turned back on crime because there was no, I mean, in California, it's three strikes and you're out. Well, I had my three strikes, and you know, the next time I'd just be written off as a habitual criminal. So
How old were you in 1987?
1987, I would have been 33.
You strike me as, you got these entrepreneurial skills, obviously. Is that what you then did? Did you kind of like do your own business?
Well, I eventually ended up in business, but um, yeah, I'll take my hand at whatever's coming up if there's an opportunity. I mean, if my theory is if you can do business in San Quentin, you can do business anywhere,
That should be inspirational to prisoners worldwide. Jesus. So my therapist said to me, Shaun, look, the skills you've cultivated in here to deal with these thugs is gonna last you for the rest of your life. So is that what you're saying here?
Well, for example, um, I have a property. It's an old industrial property, and when I bought it, I had this tenant, and he's a junkyard dog. He was one of these fellas, big guy, bald head. He's involved in the dark side and all kinds of stuff, but he loved to intimidate people. So he would shout in your face and bang the table and make threats. And he threatened the fella I bought the place from so badly that the old guy sold it cheap just to get out of there. And I inherited this guy. But it was like watching him go through his routine. I'd seen it 100 times before. I was just watching. It was like, it was like watching a drama on TV. Each time he'd like take, because he was smart. He wouldn't, he'd come right to the edge. Like one time, he didn't pay the rent for a while. So I went to his house late one night and banged on the door. He wasn't there, but his 16-year-old daughter was. And she said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want my rent money." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Your daddy's not paying the rent." He told me he did. I said, "Well, you go tell him." Anyway, so next time I come to the place, he just starts ranting and raving. "You went to my house, you talked to my daughter, you told her I hadn't paid the rent," screaming and shouting and banging the table, and he throws a chair against the wall. And I'm just watching this guy. Of course, I'm sitting myself, so if he like makes a move my direction, I can deal with him. But you've gone through all that. You've seen that routine worked out. That's a prison routine. the guy screams and shouts, gets in your face, and you're meant to back down. You're meant to be intimidated.
Probing your reaction.
So like and he, that was, in fact, that guy still has the property next door. So
So how successful have you become?
well, successful enough. I mean, what is successful these days? I don't know. I mean, the money's inflated so badly, you call it the British peso now.
I think when you go through these things, you learn that success is mental, really. And you strike me as level-headed.
Well, if you feel comfortable with yourself, you've been successful.
Yeah, if you're happy in your own skin.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
the
good
one.
goal, isn't it?
That's the one.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, money doesn't really matter that much. I mean, what difference does it make what kind of car you drive? Basically, they're all the same tech these days, whether you paid £50,000 for your car or 1,500. And, clothes or what else? I mean, you want to wear jewelry? I mean, life is, the simpler things are the ones that are the most pleasurable.
Yeah.
So,
enjoying the small things.
and that's one thing prison teaches you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one lesson that you learn, is that you can live in a small space. You can eat shitty food. You can put up with stuff. And so when you run into what comes in later, you hear these people whinging all the time, and you think, come on, I mean, you guys, you've never seen it. You've never lived it.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you what's going to happen next on YouTube then. People are going to be endlessly fascinated with your story. I'm predicting it's going to get a lot of views, and people are going to start to Google you, and the trolls and the skeptics, the floodgate is going to completely open, because they're going to find these articles that describe you as a James Bond supervillain with an IQ of 160. They describe your partner Hennessy as a serial killer, murdered multiple people, but was given a pass because of his drugs.
Oh, that's Philip Thompson.
Oh, that's Thompson. Sorry,
that's
sorry.
Philip
Let's correct that. Yeah, Thompson. Then they got him described as a serial killer. Is it who was doing? Okay, and you've trained in this Japanese martial art that you just basically, the police, when they're come up to you, you just cut right through them. And if that doesn't work, you just engage in shootouts immediately without any hesitation. And then there's also, they've got you pegged as the murderer of actress Valerie McDonald, which was a brutal thing that happened. There's allegations that she was raped, murdered, tortured, all this stuff. So these media, there was an article that came out about me a few months after my arrest, and it was everything I did and 10 times more. So I know how the media work. They want to get the clicks. They put all this stuff out there. But I guarantee that trolls are going to latch onto this. They're going to say, you've got this guy on your podcast. He's a murderer. This Valerie McDonald was raped and all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. So you've never, ever been convicted of any sex offenses.
No.
Let's just make this perfectly clear.
Never convicted, never charged, never even questioned.
Yeah, yeah. And I would never, ever have anyone on my podcast who was a chomo. So let's squash that one right away. So what would you like to say, Dan, about these hyped up stories and these allegations of you being involved in the murder of Valerie McDonald, the actress?
Well, it started because when I got out on parole, my job was assistant hotel manager for this small residency hotel. And Valerie McDonald was one of the tenants. Now, a couple of people came to me and complained about her and said that she's a prostitute. Considering the neighborhood, I wasn't surprised, and I wasn't particularly bothered one way or the other. The key point is she paying the rent? Well, she wasn't, and nobody else were either. They were on rent strike, which is the reason we were drafted in to, shall we say, solve the rent strike problem. So we went about our business, and after about 2 or 3 weeks, the ones who wouldn't pay were tossed out, and the ones who did pay stayed. Now, she didn't pay, and she disappeared from the scene. You fast forward it turned out that not only did she disappear from the scene, she disappeared completely. And her parents, it turned out, were politically connected in Oregon. And they had some juice with the legislature. And they came down to try and find out what happened to her. And they hired a private investigating company called Palladino, I think. Quite a famous one. Now, what Palladino did was they had this couple who had money, who were desperately wanted to find out what happened to their daughter. And they took these people on the magical, miracle ride. And they would bring ex-convicts up who said they knew us and said that she was tortured for days in this place, and they this and that and this and that. And I think they squeezed $200,000 out of this couple.
Jesus.
And of course, to get that kind of money, the PI has got to continue to have a new lead or and so some junkie thief would say, oh yeah, I knew those guys in Quentin. I saw them outside. And yeah, they said to me, have you got some cyanide? Or, this kind of stuff. And of course, that would open up a new avenue for them to race down. And the long and short of it is that basically she told them that we'd murdered this girl. Now, in support of this theory is when I was arrested and they seized my stuff and Hennessy's stuff, they found Valerie's jacket and Valerie's voting registration card, and I think there was a suggestion, maybe a lock of her hair or some hair on her head or something like that. And of course, the circumstantial evidence jump as well. The only way you'd have had that is if you'd abducted her and killed her. But of course, what they didn't mention was the fact that Michael Hennessy, who was also an assistant manager of the hotel, had cleaned out her room. And that's presumably where he found the jacket and the voting registration. And it turned out that he'd been writing love letters to her or poetry or something. And so he might have had a thing with her. Now, she came from Oregon, and apparently they found her body somewhere in Washington. And the suggestion, the story that certainly her mother believes, is that we kidnapped her. This part's a bit confusing because they suggest that we kidnapped her in California and then buried her in cement and then took her where? Up to Washington to throw her in the river. The problem is, of course, for me, is that on the web, one guy says something and another guy just puts his block on top of that, and pretty soon you've got a magic castle. And as you described with the CIA and what was it?
Black Ops running in
Black Ops,
Nicaragua, cocaine for arms. You guys were getting weapons licenses and selling arms to the Contras and all this stuff. And
it's pretty. When I read that stuff, I thought it was interesting. I thought, wow, these guys are really up to something. And then I realized they were actually writing about me. It's just, I was just a college student who did something very stupid, ended up in prison, and I met Philip Thompson. And basically all these stories come from Philip Thompson. Now, he's a pretty enigmatic character. I couldn't tell you what's true or not. I never sat down on any CIA briefings. I don't remember President Reagan giving me the okay to smuggle guns. But it's a classic lesson in what happens on the internet when the net sleuths get excited.
They're going to get excited over this, I guarantee. There's going to be all kinds of theories coming up. Is there anything that I've missed out or anything you would like to say? Any final stories or anything in conclusion you'd like to say to the viewers out there on YouTube?
Well, the thing that got me sort of coming here and that I feel is a real injustice is the fact that in today's internet world, once your name is on the internet as a criminal or having committed a criminal offense, you have no chance to put together a future. Not the chance I had. I had a chance because I got out before the internet happened, and I could put my life together before the internet was there, just every single problem you get into is there for everybody to read. Now, how does a guy in Britain, for example, who comes out of prison, how does he get a job except for being a navvy at a construction site, maybe? I mean, there's one of these advanced criminal checks made on everybody. You can't be a teacher. You can't work for the government. You can't be in the army. You can't. I mean, how does a person start a new life? And that's the part that seems deeply unfair to me.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. I work with a charity called Prisoners Abroad, and for people like you in your situation, sometimes they come back to the UK and they've got nothing. They don't know anybody. They've been out of the country for years. Their families are overseas. So Prisoners Abroad will hook them up with a place to live, so they can have a shower right away, get cleaned up, try and get them to job interviews and stuff like that. So there are some companies in this country, I think like Timpson's and stuff like that, make extra efforts to try and hire people with criminal records. But you're right, the recidivism rate for people getting out with criminal records is so high because it's such a competitive job environment. Are they going to give it to someone who's volunteering that they've committed crimes, or are they going to give it to somebody else? And generally they'll just give it to somebody else.
Well, for example, I worked as a teacher. For many years, and I was successful as a teacher. I could handle problem students. It really wasn't a problem,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I had an interesting take on things because of my life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why should people be barred from teaching because they had a criminal record? I mean, I could understand it if you were a pedophile or something like that. But, students need different points of view. You can't just be the same sort of, cookie cutter lefty university student gets his degree and then goes to the classroom. And it's a real shame. So I think the work you do is excellent because you are giving another point of view and you are giving opportunities for the ex-convicts to, put their viewpoint forward.
Appreciate that, John. Shall we finish with a San Quentin prison handshake?
I don't know. There wasn't much touching of bodies in San Quentin.
In Arizona, it was the... What was it in San Quentin?
No, people were pretty nervous about their personal
space.
You
just didn't get close?
No, you didn't get close to people like that or make moves. Maybe you're Sally,
Does that mean I'm not going to get a hug then?
Is that what you want?
Cheers, brother. All right, thanks for coming on, man. It's brilliant.